What's up, guys? This is Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, and the broader markets. I want to break down why tomorrow is going to be another important day as we have the big guy, Jerome Powell, giving a speech. I want to break down what President Trump just said about his tariffs and also Jerome Powell as we have another update, which you should be watching for in the charts moving forward since we have some volatility coming. Just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I'm saying as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link that's down below or sign up to my QR code that's right over here. Moomoo is an amazing global brokerage that consists of many exclusive offers. If you sign up and deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $2,000, you're guaranteed 25 in total. You deposit $5,000 and you're guaranteed 60 free stocks. You also qualify for an 8.1% APY on uninvested cash, and the offer ends at the end of July in just 10 days from now. Another benefit of signing up is you guys are going to qualify for free data to look at order flow for your favorite stocks and ETFs. So check out my link down below or sign up with my QR code that's right over here to qualify for all these awesome benefits from Moomoo. Anyways, now let's talk about what's happening with the overall stock market and why tomorrow is going to be crazy. So looking at SPY, we saw a very, very interesting amount of volatility today. I mentioned in my morning video there might be a small dip before this thing starts to bounce and break all-time highs, and that was correct in the morning. Then I told you guys to watch this resistance. I marked it right here at 632. I said we need to break 632 to remain bullish, and if we can't, I'm looking for a rejection on SPY, and that's exactly what happened. We were not able to break 632 today, and we got a small rejection back down towards the 628. So the question is this rejection about to be the sign of the start of a pivot? Are we about to dump a lot lower, or are we about to continue to just bounce and break to new all-time highs? Well, it depends on a couple of factors. We have lots of data coming out tomorrow alongside Jerome Powell, the big guy, giving a speech. So honestly, anything could happen, but by watching the levels, you guys will get an idea of what to really watch for. So let me just say this. When you look at the daily time frame, it's very, very good to understand that there is a potential indecision candle that formed here, and that typically does kind of like lead to a pivot, which could signify a little bit more downside that could be coming. But keep in mind that every time we've seen a move like this, every time the market ends up like dipping, we keep getting bought back up for the time being. So if we do dip a bit more, there is still hope for bulls that we're going to get bought back up, and the market's not fully ready for a pullback quite yet. And then if you look at the weekly time frame, if we close the week around this level or even lower, that's going to be a sign that this is about to pivot. So we are once again entering a more critical territory. But like I said before, even if technicals suggest this, technical analysis is not going to be everything until we hear from Jerome Powell. So what's my view? I will give you guys my predictions in just a couple of minutes. I first need to talk about Jerome Powell and why tomorrow is going to be a crazy day. To start things off, tomorrow is going to be Tuesday, July 22nd, 2025. It's pretty crazy how we're almost towards the end of July already. It feels like the year just got started and things are just once again kicking off so quickly. So at 8:30 a.m., the big guy, Jerome Powell, is going to be speaking. This is 1 hour before the stock market ends up opening. And what Jerome Powell says could cause a lot of volatility, as you guys know. So that's the first major catalyst for the markets. The second thing is going to be at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have the Richmond Fed Manufacturing Index, shipments, and revenues coming out. So keep that in mind. Some manufacturing and services numbers will cause some volatility as well. So those are two times to watch for volatility before the market opens when Jerome Powell speaks. And also at 10 a.m., there could be a big move once all this data comes out. So be ready just to be safe. Now, when it comes to manufacturing shipments, we do anticipate the numbers should be okay because the last time the data came out, everything was fine, and there's a good chance it's going to be okay. But the market's reaction could be very nuanced because even if you have good or bad data, the market could still go up or down depending on what ends up happening, depending on levels and factors just like that. So going into Jerome Powell, okay, keep in mind that Jerome Powell has made it very clear the Fed is not just going to cut instantly, and they have to wait a lot on what the data is going to be suggesting. Jerome Powell made it very clear that right now the economy is quite solid. The economy is quite strong. The labor market is very resilient, and the overall markets can handle longer rates, higher rates for longer, essentially. Right? We could handle this, which is why the Fed has to be very persistent. Then Jerome Powell was talking about how there's a very, very big inflationary risk, right, for the summer period. Well, he was saying that for the last couple of months. And as you guys know, in the last CPI, we did see an increase in inflation, right? We're seeing all items going up just a bit, or I would say quite a bit. I wouldn't say it's like too low. And then for all items without food and energy, this would be core CPI. This has gone up just a little bit. It's gone up just a bit. So that is very serious. So I think Jerome Powell, if he wants to talk about inflation, he could kind of like address the possibility that this could just be a one-time spike. Maybe things go up just a little bit and then they start dumping. Or what could be happening is we're about to see a big surge in inflation. This is just the very start of this. And I think that there's a lot of uncertainty because of the tariff policies. So Jerome Powell is going to most likely be very ambiguous. And if he does address the higher inflation and talk about how this is kind of like undoing some of their work, that could be a little bit bearish. So we're going to have to be very, very careful with this. Also, with the strength in the economy and the way at which things are looking, there is now a 97.4% chance the Fed is going to keep rates the same in next week's FOMC meeting. It's about 1.5 weeks from now. So for now, the Fed's going to keep rates the same. And I think that they're going to have to wait a lot on policy just to be very, very safe. Now, President Trump did criticize the Wall Street Journal for being untruthful. He claims that the story that our Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent explained to him that firing Jerome Powell would be bad for the markets. He claims that story was false, and he says that no one had to explain that to him. And the reason I talk about this is because he's making it very clear that he does not want to fire Jerome Powell, and he understands the consequences of that decision. So that's a good piece of news for the markets in a way, because we know that President Trump does not want to fire Jerome Powell, and he's basically clarifying all that news that came out that he was planning on doing it. Right? That's not true. President Trump is saying he does not want to fire Jerome Powell. Now, a couple more things. Keep in mind that for tomorrow we have Coca-Cola announcing earnings in the morning. Then we have GM announcing earnings. This could cause a little bit of volatility, but the big day is going to be Wednesday when we have Tesla, Alphabet, and IBM all announcing earnings on Wednesday after market close. So be prepared, guys. Big earnings do come out in the next couple of days, but especially on Wednesday. Now, a few updates involving tariffs, and I'll talk about what's happening with the charts. The EU is ramping up retaliation plans as the US tariffs are once again incentivizing them to make a deal. So we're going to see how this goes. So what's happening is President Trump is threatening 30% tariffs on the EU. I'm trying to be very unbiased when I say this, guys. I'm just reporting what the facts are. I'm not trying to like say things are good or bad. So please don't interpret things that way. But then the EU are saying that they're going to retaliate if that ends up happening. But the thing about that is that they also want to make a deal, which is why they're not retaliating quite yet. They want to make a deal. Despite them wanting to make a deal, President Trump is saying he still wants 15 to 20% tariffs on the EU, regardless of that, because he thinks it's going to build a lot of revenue, and he still thinks that we're being very unfairly treated. Then President Trump is also talking about how he wants to impose higher tariffs on a lot of different countries. Some are as high as 50%, but that's particularly Brazil. But for other countries, I know this article kind of like is including like Canada, Mexico, Japan, and others. Particular goods do have 50% rates, such as like steel. He was thinking of increasing it to that extent. But for most goods, it's actually going to be around like 25 to 30% for these countries, unless things end up changing. But the reason I bring this up is because we had President Trump say that the reciprocal tariffs will take effect on August 1st, and there's no changing. There's no changing that. For now, that's when they're going to be taking effect. Even the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said the same thing. So the tariffs are going to be imposed on August 1st. Okay, so like, for example, the EU is going to be hit with 30% tariffs by August 1st if they don't make a deal. However, they could still make a deal after the date. So starting August 1st, they could be hit with the 30% tariffs, but in September, however long it takes them, they could still make a deal to negotiate lower tariffs. That's what Lutnick just said. So that is a decent piece of news so far, but keep in mind that once the tariffs do come out, once they are imposed, they will have effects, and we'll see how that ends up affecting the markets. Finally, President Trump has repeated that there's going to be a deal coming between the US and India, possibly before the tariff deadline. So within the next like 9 days, there could be a big deal between the US and India. We'll see what that leads to. President Trump is still talking about that. Right now, the market is at greed. It's not at extreme greed. It's very close to that because we did dip a little bit. We'll see if we maintain these levels or not. Momentum's at greed as the market is still technically on an uptrend. The put to call option ratio is at extreme greed right now, and the VIX is currently neutral. We're going to see if this becomes more bullish or not. For now, it's in a more neutral phase, and that could lead to some downside. So that being said, what do I think is going to happen with the markets moving forward? What is my prediction? Well, let's zoom out for a second. As you guys could tell, SPY dipped right over here back in the end of June. Then we rallied. Then we dipped. Then we rallied. Then we dipped. Then we rallied. Then we dipped. Then we rallied. So every time we're seeing dips, we keep on getting bought back up. And that's what the trend is suggesting so far. However, there is a double bearish divergence on SPY and the QQQ, which could suggest that eventually there's going to be a transition where instead of making higher highs and higher lows, we start breaking support and then we start making new lows like this. There's going to eventually be a time when that happens, and we're watching to see when that ends up happening or not. So we're not going to worry too much about the overall trend for now. We're just going to play this as it is. For the shorter term, we do look a little bit more in favor of bears. I think we might dip a little bit more because of this rejection that formed right here, which goes to show that 630 to 632 area is going to be very, very tough resistance. Of course, it also depends on what happens with earnings, other factors like that. So please keep that in mind. That's going to be very, very key for how things end up moving. So please keep that in mind, especially as we progress. We have to wait and see how things end up going. But I just want to say that for now, here's what you're essentially watching for. If you want to be a big bull on SPY, if you want to be very, very bullish, you want to see us break 632 as resistance and start breaking new all-time highs. That's going to take us in a more bullish trend. If you're bearish on SPY, you want to see us basically fail at 625 then 622. If 622 fails, let's expect some more downside. So be very, very careful. But my guts tells me that we're still technically on an uptrend. So what I think is going to happen is we might dip a little bit more. We might see this actually dip towards this like 625 area to 626, which is very close to where our 20 EMA happens to be. I would not be surprised if we come down to test that. Then we'll see if we get some kind of bounce or not. I think that's going to be very, very key for how we end up moving. When you zoom out and go to the 30 minutes time frame, there's also the possibility of a potential head and shoulders like structure. So this is kind of like a left shoulder, this is like a head, and this is like a right shoulder. Maybe we bounce tomorrow morning, and then we start to dip down towards that 626 to 625 area, and then we'll see if we bounce off that, depending on Jerome Powell's speech. But for now, the odds do favor a test of 625, looking at the current trend. The 4-hour also shows a bearish divergence. And because of this big rejection, my prediction is that we might pop in the morning. And then when Jerome Powell gives his speech, we might see a test of that 625 area. And we'll see if we bounce off that or not. But I do anticipate a little bit more downside for now as the most likely possibility. With the QQQ, notice that I called out 566 as a tough resistance. I said we have to break that to remain bullish. And if we don't, then there could be a small dip. Now, the trend is bullish, okay? We're testing this white line. We're bouncing off the white line, continuing to make higher highs and higher lows. We're still technically bullish, at least based off what we're seeing so far. But if you want to be bearish, we need to see the QQQ basically lose this support. You need to lose basically 555-ish. If that fails us, we could be dipping a lot more, and that could be the sign of a pivot. If you're bullish, you want to see us basically hold above 566 and continue this uptrend. If it does, we're going to make new highs. My guts tells me we're going to be dipping a bit more. I think the most likely possibility is we come down a bit, closer to 560, perhaps, very close to where this green 20 EMA happens to be. So 560 to 561 could be tested. Then we're going to be watching to see if we bounce off that or not. Of course, it depends on Jerome Powell and our data, but I do think that we might be dipping a bit more initially. So keep that in mind. For the IWM, we're also range bound right here, going back and forth between supply and demand. I still think this is kind of weak here because we're starting to reject. We're making lower highs here. Might bounce a little bit before it starts dipping towards this imbalance, which would take us down towards 220 to 218. Then we'll see if we bounce off this again or not. But I anticipate some downside at least nonetheless. For ES, same thing. We have a bearish divergence. There's a double bearish divergence on the MACD and RSI relative to price. And simultaneously, there's a tough resistance. I called out 63.80-ish. I said around there, the closer we get to that, there's going to likely be a rejection. I believe we rejected off 63.75 instead. We need to break and hold that to remain bullish. If we can't, the odds are going to be favoring 63.36 to 63.13, this range down here. I think we might be returning to the EMAs. Then we'll see if we bounce or not off of this. We're going to have to be very, very careful. But I anticipate some downside to the lower 6,300, so we'll have to see how it goes. For NQ, we're making higher highs and higher lows. But keep in mind that we need to break 23,400 to be more bullish. If we can't, we're looking for 23,239 to 23,200. And then we'll see if we bounce off this to continue to go higher or not. But the odds do favor that downwards direction, at least nonetheless. For Bitcoin, as you can tell, we're making lower highs right here. If we break past 119,000, we're bullish. But if we end up losing 116,500, we're going to be more bearish. As we're making lower highs, we're favoring, once again, that 116,000 area, and we'll see if we bounce off that or not. But I anticipate some sideways price action. Tesla has a nice inverse head and shoulders here. There's like a left shoulder, a head, and then a right shoulder. But for now, we're not ready to just break out for the 340s. I still think we're kind of rejecting off this level, and we could dip a little bit more. We could be looking for a test of 322 to 325. Then we'll see if Tesla could bounce off these EMAs before it tries to go higher like this. So for tomorrow in particular, I think that the odds favor Tesla consolidating and maybe coming down a bit. We might be retesting this resistance, becoming support around 322 to 325. And then we'll see if we bounce and continue to go higher. For now, be prepared for some downside. On Nvda, we're showing some weakness. We need to hold 169. There's a big test right here. One concern is that this resembles a left shoulder, a head, and then a right shoulder. If Nvda fails, if we don't hold 169, man, this is going to be dipping to fill this gap most likely, and that could drag the QQQ lower. So there is a big risk in this market in case we do get some kind of rejection move that could drag things a lot lower. On Appl, we're making higher highs and higher lows. We need to hold above 211. I do think it might try to push for like 214 or so, but because of that wick there, it's going to likely continue to consolidate like this. We need to break 214 to be bullish and lose 210 to be more bearish, but I do anticipate some sideways price action as time goes on. For Netflix, we're looking a bit more bullish. We've been making lower highs and lower lows, but I like the fact that it's trying to bounce right here. So look for a test of 1,240 to 1,250. We'll see if we break through this. If not, we could reject, but I still anticipate some upside at least nonetheless. For MSTR, we're making lower highs right here. We need to break past 435 to bounce, but if we lose support at 422, we're looking for a dip. My gut, once again, is telling me that we're going to likely consolidate like this before we start dipping back down towards 412, so please keep that in mind. For Celsius, we're making lower highs here. We have a nice looking head and shoulders. If we break 44.4, we're going to be bullish, but if we can't and we lose 43, I could be looking for a dip to 42. So basically, it might dip it might bounce like this before it starts to continue to dip, and we could be on our way down to the 42s. I'm looking for a move like that as we're looking bearish. We also have this resistance that's kind of like forming that looks like this. So if it does bounce, it's going to likely continue to downtrend. Same thing with Supermicro. It's kind of following Nvidia. So a lot of these semiconductor stocks are moving similarly. They're following Nvidia. That's the big leader and their followers out there. So we need to get back above 54 to rebound. If not, I see some consolidation, then maybe a dip to fill this gap back down to 50. That could be another factor. Palantir has support at 151. We got to hold this. If not, this might be dipping towards 146. So we'll see how that goes. Rivian needs to bounce above 14. If not, we're looking for 13.5 to 13.26. For SoFi, we're basically forming a head and shoulders. We're also making lower highs. We could be dipping to 20.45. AMD is also showing some weakness, in my opinion, because just like Nvidia, it's trying to dip here. My concern is that there's a possible left shoulder, head, and right shoulder. And if we can't hold 155 near the 20 EMA, we may continue to fall back down towards 152 to 150. We'll have to see how it goes. ARM is rejecting here. We need to get back above 162. If not, we're looking for a dip to 156. PayPal's on an uptrend. Unless we end up losing 74, then we could be dumping. Coinbase is trying to bounce here. If we end up losing 409, we're looking for a dump back down to the low 400s. But if we break past 431, we're looking for a bounce. So I think we could kind of rebound before we start falling. I think we're trading sideways here on Coinbase. We might be pushing for like 425, come back down and consolidate. So keep that in mind. That's going to be very key for how we end up moving. For Amazon, we're looking more bullish. We're looking for 230 star resistance, and we'll see if this breaks out or not. Look for a test of 230 and see what kind of reaction we get. It's still looking quite bullish with good news. We're at resistance on Meta. This white line is resistance. We need to break this. We need to break above 716 to start pushing for essentially 720. But if we lose 709, we're looking for a dump back down. So be very, very careful, at least nonetheless. For Google, we're looking quite bullish. If we break 192, we're going to be looking for an attempt to pump more. But if we lose 188, we're looking for a dip to 185. But nonetheless, it's still looking quite bullish to me. Um, Looking at Microsoft, we're also trading sideways. If we lose 508, we're looking for a dump to 505. If we break past 512, we're looking for a push higher. I anticipate some sideways price action. So Google is kind of like leading tech right now because we have earnings for Google slash Alphabet on Wednesday. But Microsoft is kind of flat here. I think it's going to likely trade sideways, just like this, not really do a whole lot. So we might be retesting 508, but there's not really much going on. With tech showing some consolidation, I think that could also fuel somewhat of a sell-off alongside like semiconductors, which look like they may sell off a bit more right now, which makes me suspect the market may cool off a bit. So we're going to see if the VIX bounces here. There's support at 16.3. If it breaks out, that could be another sign that's worth watching. The 10-year, the dollar, crude, all these may move based off what Jerome Powell says and other factors, so I'm not really too worried about them. But the setup does look a bit more bearish. We do favor 625 or below on SPY, and we'll see if we bounce off that. The QQQ is also favoring downside, especially if you see a sell-off on Nvda. I think that could really lead things. So, of course, I can't make promises. It depends on what Jerome Powell says and what happens with the Richmond Fed manufacturing numbers. But for now, technically speaking, we do favor downside a little bit more. There might be a little bit more downside coming before the market tries to bounce again if it can. Anyways, that is it for this one. I thank you all so much for listening. Enjoy the rest of your guys' days, nights, and evenings. And I'll see you guys very soon tomorrow morning before the market opens. That's your update for now. Thanks again, and peace out.